Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here, and it's a nice, relaxing atmosphere. So I hope I won't, be too nervous talking to you all. I think a lot of good things have been said. What we're talking about is, first of all, let me introduce myself by saying that besides being the head of UNDP, I'm also the UN Development Coordinator, which means that I coordinate the activities of all the UN agencies working to advance development here in Kosovo, including UNHCR. My colleague Joe here is representing UNHCR, and there are others that you might know, like UNICEF and all others. And I want to sort of, in my brief intervention, argue why have we selected to focus on the overall theme of social inclusion for our 5-year plan, coordinated UN plan. And if I'm not convincing enough, then I would welcome you challenging me or otherwise advising me how I can better sell our agenda. Because that's what we need to do. It's not enough for this to be the UN's agenda. I want it to be Kosovo's agenda, and I have to tell you that it's a bit of a challenge. When we came together, all of the UN agencies, to see how can we be more strategic and what can we focus on that can really make our contribution of added value, we had to take into account that we're certainly not the biggest players in town in terms of our power and resources. We're not USAID, we're not the European Commission, we're not the World Bank. And after a lot of deliberation, what we came to is that one area that really is somehow missing attention is the fact that as all of the focus in Kosovo is we need to grow quickly, we need to develop our economy, we need to address the big unemployment issues, that in all of this discussion the issue of equality and fairness is somehow missing. And when you look at what's happening around in the world, we're living in a phase where the issue of inequality is becoming more and more prominent, and the price paid of inequality. When you look at from the cases of the Arab Spring, where you had a very stable economies that were touted as the best examples by the World Bank in terms of the growth of GDP, all of a sudden fall apart because people felt excluded, people felt that they weren't heard, youth in particular, women as well, marching into the streets and asking for change. Also in the most developed economies, when you look at some of the quotes that I've been hearing from people like Joseph Stiglitz and others about the figures that are sometimes astounding, that you have the 1% of adults in the world owning 40% of global assets, whereas the poorest 50% of people, adult people in the world, own 1%. So you're thinking something is going completely crazy. And historically, I want to argue, and this is where UNDP and I think the UN generally have come to appreciate over the past, I think it's now 20 years that the Human Development Reports have been developed, through very important work that was done by Nobel Prize-winning economist Amartya Sen and Mahmoud El-Haq, that came up with this concept of human development, which means that it's not about becoming rich and putting money in your pocket. That doesn't measure enough what development is. It's about well-being that is measured in many other ways. It's about how well, how free you are to express your opinions, how integrated you feel within your community. It's about health, access to education, And I think that that concept remains very valid to introduce more strongly here in Kosovo. There have been a lot of studies that have shown whether we're looking at equality from the perspective that Leon mentioned of women's inclusion. Certainly that it is not just a right for women to equality if you look from the moral perspective, from the human rights perspective, but that it is a loss for countries and societies if women are excluded. Also, it has been shown that if you raise women's education, I'm talking about less developed examples than Kosovo, but certainly in places, when you look at a place like India, in Kerala, just raising women's education, even though the country remained very, very poor, the Human Development Index immediately went up in terms of better health, better, education, without the GDP growing. So our argument is that, Kosovo has a, quite well articulated development policies. You have the medium-term expenditure framework, you have now this economic vision and action plan, and those are very much focused on really getting the country ahead and to pick up and to grow with more focus on agriculture and, a lot of good and important things. But what we argue is that there is a way to do that can get the same results but by benefiting only the few. And there is a way to do that in a way that it goes more to the entire society, that it's done in a way that lifts those that are left behind, whether it's minority or women, particularly rural women, rural populations, those that are returning, that were internally displaced before, into society, and that if it is done in that way, it doesn't happen automatically. It needs a particular policy design and intention so that it happens, that looks at what we call growth being inclusive, and that if if it happens that way, Kosovo will become a more stable place, in a more sustainable way. Certainly from the UN perspective, another important aspect to when you talk about successful development is also another aspect that is often left, sort of ignored or sort of put at the bottom of the list, and that is the fact that the environmental sustainability. It's as if, no, we can't deal with this now, so let's deal with it later when we become richer and when we become, we have, dealt with the immediate problems. And again, we want to argue that this needs to go hand in hand with development. You can't, no longer is it, can any country afford to sort of say development first and environmental sustainability later. Now, it's a challenge to sell this agenda because it's as if we are the softies that are, we're doing it as if it's out of our blessed heart, good hearts. But again, I want to say that whether it's the World Bank and even when I speak to my colleague from the IMF, there is tangible evidence that focusing on these issues in the end, even economically, from a very unemotional analytic way, there is evidence to show that in the end societies that invest more than Kosovo does in the social sectors, in education, in health, in protection networks, that societies thrive. And I think it's important to also look at some of the examples when you think about countries like South Korea, that used to be very poor. I mean, the big boom in South Korea came out of heavy investment in education and in all of these, investment internally, the human capital. And there's so much talented youth here in Kosovo, but I still think that as much as, you know, there is wording and sort of some intention to invest in the educational system, but it's certainly not enough to look at, you know, the cutting edge examples. So anyway, I see maybe I've spoken enough. No, I think I'll stop here. I have some of my colleagues from my, you know, the agencies here, and perhaps others can sort of chip in if I've forgotten some of our arguments. But for starters, I think that's good enough, and maybe I'll hand it over to Joe to complement my thinking. Thank you.